Welcome to Property Mama Adventures in Real Estate, episode 30. It's here each week that I share my experiences in the real estate industry, all the shenanigans that go on. I've been buying and selling real estate for nearly 3 decades. So, as always, shenanigans aplenty. If we've not met before, my name is Wendy Chamberlain, and I am a buyer's agent, a buyer's advocate here in Melbourne, Australia. So we've covered a few times about real estate auctions. Here in Melbourne, Melbourne is an auction town, and there's lots of auctions that go on every single week. And there are various strategies that you can employ when it comes time for you to bid at auction. So there's a whole bunch of prep that you need to do in the lead up to an auction, and I have covered bits and pieces in relation to that in previous episodes of Property Mama. So today I wanted to talk about some of the auction strategies that you can employ when it's coming to the pointy end of things and you're showing up to bid at auction on a property. So it's very, very common for properties to be sent to auction, and sometimes you can make offers prior to secure them before the auction day, but under certain circumstances, depending on who the vendor is, circumstances of the vendor, who the real estate agent is, that they like to send them to auction because it is an unconditional sale under the hammer on the day of the auction, and also it is one of the most transparent ways in which real estate can be sold. Because if you think about the process for real estate negotiation, you really don't have any way to see that who else is involved in the process. What does that mean for you when it comes time for bidding at auction? Well, there's lots of different strategies that you can employ. And this came up recently when I met up with a client, because we were sitting down to talk about auction strategy. And they asked the question, so what is my strategy when it comes to bidding at auction? And I said to them, there's no single strategy when it comes to bidding at auction. And the reason for that is because you're never dealing with the same set of circumstances. You're dealing with a different house, you're dealing with different vendors, you're dealing with different selling conditions, you're dealing with different real estate agents, and you're also dealing with a different set of buyers. Because one of the key tips that I can give you when it comes to auctions and deciding what you want to do is you need to be able to read the play. You need to have enough experience to know what is going on and to read the players involved in the process. So who are those people that we're talking about? So you've got the real estate agent, which most likely is the person that you've been talking to in the lead up to the actual auction. On the day of the auction, you've got the auctioneer. Now, the auctioneer sometimes is the same person. They are the real estate agent that you've been speaking through the campaign, but sometimes they are a dedicated auctioneer. So some real estate agencies have the selling agents that are the person that you're speaking to, dealing with the person you meet on the door when you enter the property to go and inspect the home, or even the person doing the callbacks after the open for inspections have happened. There'll be somebody on the phone making calls, ringing people back. And that may or may not be the person who is the auctioneer. Depending on the experience of that person, they may well be the person that's going to stand up and call the auction on the day. But some real estate agencies bring in dedicated auctioneers, and they go from auction to auction, and that's what they do. They just auction. They don't actually deal with the buyers per se. And on the day of the auction, the real estate agent that you have been dealing with often will be one that is walking around the crowd. And you may have attended an auction where you have seen the real estate agents walking, the buyers, walking from buyer to buyer just to gauge their interest if they're bidding, and they may even be holding up a bit of paper. Basically, they're a penciler, and they're standing there with the bit of paper in front of the buyer so they can see where bidding is up to. So where you have a real estate agency that's acting like that, the auctioneer doesn't really have any personal connection with the buyers that are standing there. That's why the real estate agents that have been dealing with the buyers through the campaign are the ones that are going and talking to the people in the crowd. Whereas if you're dealing with the auctioneer, who is also the person that you have spoken to through the campaign to find out more about the property, they sometimes have a bit of an inside edge if they haven't been properly informed by the selling agents, because they have developed some kind of rapport with you as the buyer, and so they have a bit of a more of a personal understanding of your circumstances, and oftentimes the way that they relate to you can be more personable. It's all just tactics of how the real estate agents and the auctioneers choose to sell the properties. It's certainly not something that we as the buyer get to choose. You don't get to choose who the selling agent is. That's done by the vendor. And you don't get to choose whether or not there's an auctioneer that is separate to the process that's brought in for that property sale, or if it's one of the agents that you've been dealing with through the campaign. That none of that information is up to us, which is why I say that it's important for you to have some inkling of you knowing what you're doing. And so when my client said to me, what are my strategies? I went through a number of different scenarios as to what you might do and what you don't necessarily want to do. So one of the key thing that you need to establish in your mind, either for yourself or amongst whoever it is that is buying the property, if it's you and a family member, or whomever it is buying the property, you need to have established your budget and what it is you're prepared to spend on that home. Now, let me be clear here. Your budget that you have to buy real estate may be more than what this home is worth, or more than what you're prepared to spend on this property. So the reason I say that it is so important for you to know what your budget is beforehand, before you start bidding on a property, is because it is a tactic to use as part of the bidding when things get underway. So if you've ever been to an auction, you know that things can get quite hectic pretty quickly, and things can move at a real pace, and there's a lot of bits and pieces, moving parts going on, and people are getting emotional. And the real estate agents and the auctioneers, their job is to get you to bid and to get you to spend as much money as possible, because they're not working for you. They're working for the seller. The vendor has appointed them, and it is their job to get the property sold and to get it sold for the reserve, or as much over the reserve price as they can. And so they will be pushing all the buyers as much as they can to get them to bid, but also once they start bidding, to get as much money out of them and get them to continue to bid, because that's what they want. They want a competition. It takes two to have a competition, and if two people are bidding against each other, that's how property prices can go up as much as they do during an auction, and absolutely get out of hand under certain circumstances. And the properties that get out of hand is where emotion comes in, and generally it is where the buyer has changed the amount that they're prepared to spend on a property. So this is why I say it's vitally important for you to set your budget for that home before you start bidding, because if you change your mind during the middle of an auction whilst it's going at the clip that it goes at, and you decide to increase your budget and keep bidding, it is blatantly obvious to anybody with any experience in the industry. I certainly can see when people do it, that I can see when they have hit the maximum that they wanted to spend on this property, and then they keep bidding, because there's a tell. Every single person has a tell, and it's in your body language. The body language of the person changes when they have hit their budget, but then decided to keep going. And this is one of the things about attending auctions. You need to be able to read the play. You need to be able to read the body language of anyone else there in the crowd that is bidding or that you're bidding against. And it shows a sign of weakness if you start saying no, but then go over your budget. It is so very clear, particularly to the real estate agent and the auctioneer. It'll be clear to them, so they know that they've got you from what would have been perhaps a calm state where you knew where you were bidding up to you've now entered into an emotional state. So, and when You are in an emotional state. You make decisions. It's a human thing. You make decisions that are not necessarily rational. And I see this all the time, that if people are not making rational decisions in the heat of the moment, when they're getting pressured, because it's a pressure cooker situation, you have all the eyes of anyone else that's standing there on you. They're trained on you. You may have a real estate agent standing next to you, whispering in your ear, prompting you, pushing you. You've also got the auctioneer looking at you, going at you constantly. It's their job. It's what they do. It's what they're trained in. They will push you, push you, push you, push you. So you must set your budget and you must stick to it. Don't go over it. Don't go up and keep inching up, inching up. If before the auction, let's say the night before, you've sat down and you've worked out what your budget is for this home. And remember, I just said, the budget is not necessarily all the money you've got to spend on buy on a property. It's what you've done your due diligence onto the value of this home, is what you consider to be the value of the home in a sedate, calm, measured environment where you've been able to do your research and go, right, this property for us is worth X. If the next morning, on the morning of the auction, you decide that you might like to spend a little bit more, set that budget then. You do not want to be doing it at the pointy end of the auction where everybody's in this state of flux and there's all the emotion, and you decide last minute, because literally that's what people do, that you're going to keep bidding, keep bidding, keep bidding. Because the danger for you is that you will overspend and you'll end up buying a property for far more than you either intended to, or most importantly, that more than you can afford to. And I see this all the time. I remember one time there was an auction I went to, and it was flying, absolutely flying. And two men were standing on the street and they were clearly just having a competition against each other. And it was like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. They were just competing. I don't know what happened, but they just started, they wanted to outbid each other. And the actual value of the property kind of just flew out the door and they just kept bidding. And when I spoke to that real estate agent a number of weeks later, because we were still hunting in the area for our client to find a property, he said, oh, funny story. The guy that was the winner and everybody else was standing around just scratching their head about how much this guy had just spent on this property. He walked in and he said to the real estate agent, oh, I think I might have just overpaid. And the real estate agent said, well, maybe sign here because you've just bid to buy the property. The hammer has fallen down to you. You'll be taken inside and you need to sign that paperwork at the dollar value that you just bid up to. You can't change your mind then because you've just bought under auction terms. It's final, it's unconditional. You are the buyer of that property. So there's no get out of jail free card during an auction. You need to make these measured decisions before and stick to your guns, because anybody there can see where emotion has started to come in and it is not going to be to your benefit at all. So that's one of the first things, is setting your budget and understanding where things are, what the value is, and as the auction goes along, where the property is tracking. The second thing you need to understand is to be able to read the speed of an auction and how things are going. As a general rule, when an auction starts, the dollar increments are larger. And where an auctioneer starts an auction and nobody, they'll call for bids. They'll call for an opening bid. And if nobody in the crowd standing there offers up an opening bid, they will make what's called a vendor bid, which is a starting bid. And then they will call for dollar rises from there. Usually, if it's right at the start of an auction, it'll be $25,000 rises, because depending on where the auctioneer has chosen to put in their vendor bid. The real estate agents and the auctioneers don't like to make more than one vendor bid, because it's not a true bid insofar as the vendor is not buying back their own house. It's just to try and get the ball rolling and get an idea in the mind of the buyers where it's starting at. And oftentimes the auctioneer will choose at the bottom of the advertised guide price. Now, that's not what's going to buy the property. It's not where the reserve is generally of the vendor. It's just a starting point to get that ball rolling, as I said. And so then from there, you as a bidder at the auction will be invited to make bids to buy the property. And they'll call for 25. And then as the auction rolls on, the bidding increments tend to get lower, and they generally are getting more reduced in the dollar amounts that are bid by the buyers that are standing there. Now, sometimes if there's no bidders at all, an auctioneer may put in a second vendor bid, because what they're trying to do is they're getting as close as they can to what is the vendor's reserve price. So if the property has to be passed in, they will do that, and they're closer to the price that they're going to then advertise the property for private sale, which is what will happen after an auction. If it's not actually sold under the hammer, it will get advertised. So, but where there are buyers actively involved in the bidding process, the buyers tend to start to control the amounts that they are prepared to offer, with the guidance, and it is very strong guidance from the auctioneer. The auctioneer has the right to refuse bids, and obviously the auctioneer is wanting as large amounts of bids each time as they can for as long as they can. So if they're starting in $25,000 lots, they don't want you to offer $1,000 because you've gone from this to this. It's like, wow, it really slows the momentum of an auction. So they're going to be wanting much bigger bids. So the auction that I attended on the weekend, they started with a vendor bid to get things underway, and then they called for $25,000 bids. So you as the buyer, you don't necessarily want to be participating in offering up $25,000 lots at a time, because that's how much the price is jumping. Now, having said that, you have to get to the reserve price and the property be on the market before you've got any hope of even being able to buy the property. This is what I'm saying about being able to read the speed of an auction, to know when, and also listening to the languaging of the auctioneer, to know when you have an indication that the property is close to its reserve or about to be or is on the market, because they're not going to sell it to you if it's not on the market. And you may have observed when you've gone along to real estate auctions that people will hold back and not actually bid until a property is on the market. I'm not quite sure what their thinking is there. Perhaps they're thinking they don't want to put their money towards something that's not on the market yet. But the reality is, if it's not on the market and you're bidding, you're not going to buy it anyway. It's only going to be purchased, the property's only going to be sold to you if we've hit the reserve, if it's actually on the market. So it kind of doesn't make sense to not bid to get a property to the reserve if you're going to jump in and start bidding when it's at the reserve or over the reserve anyway, because you would have bid anyway. So this whole thought process around, well, I'm not going to contribute to getting it further up, well, it doesn't work that way, because you wouldn't buy it anyway. And if the property gets passed in, if you haven't bid, you don't get the first right of refusal at the vendor's reserve price, because you get exclusively 15 minutes to talk to the real estate agent and the auctioneer privately in the home. If it's been passed in, anyone else that was there that was bidding, if the property is not passed in personally to them, they're not going to get the opportunity privately to have the discussion with the real estate agent to be the one that they negotiate with. That's reserved to the person that it passes in. So you need to carefully watch how the auction is proceeding and gauge, is it likely to be passed in? Are other people going to get started? Other buyers get started in bidding? What's happening? So I'm saying about you need to read the play. And this comes from experience of attending auctions and seeing how they play out, because every single auction is different. Every single auctioneer is different. How they call for bids, how they call the auction, all totally different. So being able to read the play will give you good insight as to when to start bidding. You may like to start early on. You might like to start later on. It's all very personal and individualized to the actual circumstances of the auction. And it comes from that experience that I talk about of knowing how to read body language, how to read body language, and how to read the play and the speed and the pace of how an auction is going. So once a property has been declared on the market, that triggers in a whole raft of additional types of scenarios that can play out and other real estate auction tactics that can then be implemented and come into play. And I will continue talking about these on the next episode of Property Mama. So tune in if you want to hear about, once a property has been put on the market, how to ask whether or not a property has been put on the market, because there is some languaging there to use to address the auctioneer to see whether or not the property is on the market. And then once it's been declared on the market, what do you need to do? How does your strategy and your tactics change? Because they should change, to then position yourself to be the one that is the winning bidder and gets to take the keys and buy yourself a new home. So Chamberlain Property Advocates is our buyer's agency. We work with clients. We bid at auction for clients. Oftentimes we have clients that haven't done it for a very long time. We work with lots of first-time buyers that have not bid before at all. And we also work with people who are busy, time poor. They might be interstate, they might be overseas, and we are their eyes and ears on the ground to be there as their professional representative to bid at auction for them. I am a fully licensed real estate agent as well, which means that I can sign paperwork on behalf of our clients and I represent them and their interests at the auction. It's what we do. As I said, I've been buying and selling real estate for almost 30 years. So if that's you, if you're unavailable, you're nervous, you're not sure what to do, you fear that you're going to overpay for a property, all of those thoughts you might be having when it comes to buying real estate, please get in touch with us. You can slip into our DMs. You can get in touch via our website, chamberlainadvocates.com.au, and we can have a conversation about how we can help you too to buy a property. If you've been enjoying listening to Property Mama, we're up to episode 30. Wow, would you believe 30 episodes? If you've got a burning real estate question you'd like me to answer for you, I'm happy to do that as well. Just pop through a question and we can cover that off in a future episode. Or if you're loving the podcast, we would really appreciate you sharing it with your friends and family, any colleagues that you know might be interested in real estate or looking to buy or sell a home. That's who we would love to get into the ears of, because lots of people love talking about real estate. It seems to be a great hot topic at your local barbecue. People want to know what's going on with the market, and we would love to help them out and keep them informed. So thank you once again for joining me on this most recent adventure for Property Mama. We'll be back next week with another episode for you. We'll talk more about auction tactics. So once again,